Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, not a worst-case scenario being walked back by morning, and not the kind of geopolitical theater that gets memory hold by the next news cycle. Tonight, the strategic balance that has governed European security for 7 decades did not shift. It collapsed. China has transferred an undisclosed number of Dongfeng-41 intercontinental ballistic missiles to Russia, and the ramifications of this single event are so profound, so irreversible, and so catastrophic in their implications that every NATO capital is currently operating under crisis protocols not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The number that Russia has just received from Beijing represents a capability expansion that exceeds the entire French and British strategic nuclear arsenals combined. This is not an arms deal. This is the permanent alteration of the European strategic equation, executed with a speed and decisiveness that has left Western alliance structures paralyzed, defensive architectures obsolete, and deterrence frameworks shattered beyond recognition. Within 72 hours, NATO must formulate a response to a threat vector that its entire defensive posture was never designed to address, and every option on the table carries consequences that range from catastrophic to civilization ending. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and mainstream defense commentary, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition. What unfolds tonight is not a briefing you will find in sanitized press releases or carefully managed official statements. This is the raw strategic reality that alliance planners are confronting behind closed doors, while public-facing officials issue reassurances designed to prevent mass panic. The Dongfeng-41 represents the most advanced road-mobile intercontinental ballistic missile system currently in operational deployment anywhere on Earth. Designated by NATO reporting nomenclature as CSS-X-20, this weapon system embodies capabilities that render the entire architecture of European missile defense strategically irrelevant. The DF-41 carries a throw weight of approximately 2,500 kilograms, enabling deployment of up to 10 independently targetable re-entry vehicles, each with yields estimated between 150 and 300 kilotons. The significance of this multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle configuration cannot be overstated. A single DF-41 launch vehicle can prosecute 10 separate strategic targets simultaneously, overwhelming defensive intercept capacity through sheer numerical saturation, regardless of technological sophistication. The missile's range exceeds 14,000 kilometers, placing every European capital, every NATO strategic facility, and every critical infrastructure node from Lisbon to the Ural Mountains within engagement envelope, from launch positions deep inside Russian territory. The road-mobile configuration mounted on 8 axial transporter erector launchers provides operational mobility that defeats satellite tracking, preemptive targeting, and counterforce strategies. These systems can disperse across Russia's vast transportation network, disappear into hardened underground facilities, and emerge at unpredictable locations with launch readiness achieved in under 15 minutes from movement cessation. The terminal phase characteristics represent the dimension where Western defensive capabilities face mathematical impossibility. Each re-entry vehicle executes hypersonic terminal velocity, approaching Mach 25, while performing evasive maneuvers designed to defeat intercept geometry. The defensive systems currently deployed across Europe, the ground-based mid-course defense installations, the Aegis ashore facilities in Romania and Poland, and the terminal high-altitude area defense batteries positioned in forward locations, were optimized against non-maneuvering re-entry vehicles, following predictable ballistic trajectories. Against maneuvering re-entry vehicles executing lateral displacement at hypersonic velocity during terminal phase, intercept probability degrades to single-digit percentages under optimal engagement conditions. The transfer represents a strategic calculation by Beijing that reveals how profoundly the global power architecture has already shifted beneath the surface of official diplomatic language. China is openly providing Russia with the capability to hold every European population center hostage to nuclear annihilation, and doing so with complete confidence that Western response options are constrained to the point of strategic paralysis. This transfer would have been unthinkable during any previous era of great power competition. The fact that it is occurring now, openly, with satellite imagery confirming the movement of transporter erector launchers across the Sino-Russian border, demonstrates that China no longer fears Western retaliation, no longer respects Western deterrence, and no longer operates within the frameworks that govern strategic stability throughout throughout the Cold War period. NATO faces a 72-hour decision window, not because that represents the time required for Russia to achieve operational deployment, but because that represents the maximum period during which the alliance can maintain information control before the transfer becomes public knowledge, triggering political crisis across European capitals. The missiles are already operational. The targeting packages are already programmed. The launch authorization protocols are already integrated into Russian strategic command architecture. The 72 hours represent the window during which NATO must decide how to publicly respond to a fait accompli that has already demolished the strategic assumptions underlying European security. Every response option carries consequences that alliance planners have spent decades attempting to avoid. A military response targeting the transferred systems would require strikes against Russian territory, crossing a threshold that triggers nuclear release authorities under Russian strategic doctrine. An economic response through additional sanctions has already been demonstrated ineffective through years of previous sanction regimes that failed to modify Russian strategic behavior. A diplomatic response through negotiation requires offering concessions that NATO member states politically cannot accept. A non-response confirms strategic impotence and triggers alliance fragmentation as individual European nations pursue independent accommodation with Russia to secure their survival. The operational implications extend far beyond the immediate nuclear threat vector. Russia now possesses the capability to conduct strategic blackmail operations against individual European nations, threatening catastrophic nuclear strikes against specific countries that support Ukraine, maintain sanctions, or host NATO infrastructure. The individualized threat capability fractures alliance cohesion by creating impossible political dilemmas for national governments facing populations who will demand accommodation rather than accept annihilation for the sake of alliance solidarity. If you want analysis this sharp, this deep, this willing to challenge official narratives, subscribe now to ensure you never miss an update. The information that follows reveals the specific mechanisms through which this transfer dismantles NATO's defensive architecture and creates strategic impossibilities that alliance military planners are confronting in real time. The European missile defense architecture was designed and optimized for a threat environment that no longer exists. The Aegis Ashore installations in Romania and Poland, representing billions in infrastructure investment and years of diplomatic negotiation to secure host nation agreements, were calibrated against Iranian ballistic missile threats characterized by limited numbers, predictable trajectories, and non-maneuvering re-entry vehicles. These facilities possess intercept capacity measured in dozens of missiles against hundreds of incoming re-entry vehicles now deliverable by Russian strategic forces enhanced with Chinese DF-41 capabilities. The mathematical impossibility is absolute. Defensive intercept magazines would be exhausted after engaging the re-entry vehicles from fewer than 5 attacking missiles, while Russian forces can now generate salvo employment measured in hundreds of simultaneous launches. The ground-based mid-course defense system, the crown jewel of American strategic defense investment, faces similar mathematical constraints. The entire system possesses fewer than 50 operational interceptors protecting the continental United States. The system was never designed, never intended, and never optimized to defend European territory. Its engagement envelope cannot provide coverage against weapons launched from Western Russian territory against European targets. The defensive architecture simply does not exist to address the threat vector that Russia has acquired through Chinese transfer. The temporal dimension compounds the impossibility. The DF-41 achieves boost phase completion in approximately 3 minutes, transitions to mid-course phase lasting 12 to 15 minutes depending on trajectory optimization, and executes terminal phase in under 90 seconds from re-entry vehicle separation to impact. The entire engagement timeline from launch detection to warhead detonation spans fewer than 20 minutes for targets in Central Europe. Decision cycles, command authorization, defensive system engagement sequences, and intercept execution must occur within windows measured in single-digit minutes. Human decision-making cannot function at the speed required. Automated response systems do not exist with authority to execute nuclear-scale defensive operations without human authorization. The defensive problem is temporally unsolvable even if technological solutions existed. The geographic reality creates additional impossibility layers. Russia can position DF-41 transporter erector launchers across 11 time zones, spanning continental distances that defeat Western intelligence surveillance capacity. Satellite tracking cannot maintain continuous coverage of mobile targets across such vast territory. Ground-based radar networks cannot penetrate Russian airspace to track launcher movements in real time. By the time launch detection occurs through infrared satellite sensors identifying rocket plume signatures, the missiles are already in boost phase, with defensive response windows already closing. Preemptive targeting strategies that might neutralize static silo-based systems are completely ineffective against road mobile launchers that can reposition continuously and unpredictably. The strategic implications cascade through every dimension of European security architecture. The conventional force balance that NATO has maintained through numerical superiority and technological advantage becomes strategically meaningless when Russian strategic nuclear capability can threaten annihilation of any European nation that permits NATO force concentration on its territory. Alliance Article 5. Mutual defense commitments become politically unenforceable when honoring them requires national governments to accept nuclear destruction of their populations and infrastructure. The American extended deterrence guarantee that has anchored European security for 70 years faces credibility collapse when Russia can threaten European targets without threatening American territory, creating political separation between American security interests and European survival requirements. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. The conclusions that follow reveal how this single transfer event accelerates the multipolar transition and permanently fractures the Western alliance system that has governed global order since 1945. Every European capital is conducting emergency strategic assessments, reaching identical conclusions. National survival now depends on accommodation with Russia rather than confrontation. The Nordic nations that maintain neutrality throughout the Cold War are reconsidering NATO membership applications approved in response to Ukrainian conflict. Germany faces impossible choices between energy security dependent on Russian supply relationships and alliance solidarity that threatens economic collapse. France confronts the strategic reality that its independent nuclear deterrent, numbering fewer than 300 operational warheads, cannot provide credible deterrence against Russian forces, now enhanced with capabilities exceeding 1,000 additional warheads deliverable through DF-41 systems. The Chinese calculation behind this transfer reveals strategic sophistication that Western analysis consistently underestimates. Beijing achieves multiple simultaneous objectives through a single transaction. Russian strategic capacity increases without Chinese direct confrontation with NATO, maintaining plausible deniability regarding Chinese intentions toward European security. American strategic attention becomes consumed by European crisis management, reducing focus and resources available for Indo-Pacific competition. NATO alliance cohesion fractures under pressure of existential national survival decisions, weakening the primary institutional mechanism through which American power has been projected globally. The transfer costs China nothing in terms of strategic capability degradation, as DF-41 production continues with newer variants already entering operational deployment within Chinese forces. The timing synchronization across multiple theaters reveals coordinated strategic planning between Moscow and Beijing that Western intelligence architectures failed to detect or anticipate. The European crisis emerges simultaneously with escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea territorial disputes, and North Korean nuclear weapons development, creating simultaneous multi-theater pressure that exceeds Western strategic bandwidth. Alliance resources, attention, and decision-making capacity face demands across multiple crisis zones simultaneously, preventing the concentrated response that might effectively address any single challenge. The Iranian dimension introduces additional complexity that further constrains Western response options. Tehran observes that China openly transfers advanced strategic weapons to Russia without triggering effective Western retaliation, demonstrating that proliferation red lines previously enforced through military action are now abandoned. Iranian ballistic missile development accelerates with confidence that Western military response has become politically impossible. Regional proliferation cascades as additional nations conclude that nuclear weapons development represents the only reliable guarantee of sovereignty against Western intervention. The Ukrainian conflict transforms from regional territorial dispute into existential NATO credibility test. Continued support for Ukraine now carries the explicit risk of Russian strategic nuclear employment against European targets using capabilities acquired from China specifically for that purpose. The political sustainability of Ukraine's support collapses across European capitals as populations demand accommodation rather than accept nuclear annihilation. American political will faces erosion as domestic constituencies question why European security should justify American strategic risk when European nations themselves are pursuing accommodation. The 72-hour window closes not with decisive NATO response, but with fragmented national reaction, revealing alliance disintegration in real time. Some nations issue strong rhetorical condemnation while privately initiating diplomatic channels with Moscow. Others announce defensive measures and alliance solidarity while simultaneously pursuing bilateral security guarantees. The collective response NATO requires to maintain deterrence credibility never materializes because the political conditions necessary for collective action no longer exist. Tonight marks the permanent end of the unipolar moment, the final collapse of the security architecture that governed European stability for 7 decades, and the emergence of a multipolar reality where regional powers possess capabilities to challenge and defeat Western military superiority. This transfer will be studied by future historians as the inflection point where American hegemony transitioned from decline to collapse, where alliance structures demonstrated fragility rather than strength, and where the balance of global power shifted irreversibly toward Eurasian integration under Chinese-Russian strategic coordination. Share this analysis with everyone who needs to understand what is actually at stake. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop asking the questions that matter.